Thank you. So, hello and welcome to the Metaphysical Healing class that we're starting today. I've lost the vision of myself. I'm going to share the screen a little bit here so that we can see. I'm going to do a little recap on the last webinar that we did and catch up a little bit. So there's going to be something that is a little bit fast and furious. I'll make the presentation here. So yeah, this is a metaphysical healing and symbolism of illness. I'm going to dive into some of these topics. And first of all, just retouching on what metaphysical is and the whole idea of metaphysical healing being the healing of the mind, the emotional body, and your soul, as well as just your physical story. We're going to try and define healing in a different way by speaking about it in a more holistic term, which refers to the whole dynamic of becoming more conscious and becoming more whole and becoming more self-aware, which relates the healing journey to our journey towards self-consciousness, self-awareness, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. It's very much in tune with the spiritual path and very much in tune with our own personal journey of becoming more who of ourselves, becoming whole in our entirety. And that means discovering parts of ourselves that are covered up. It means getting rid of things that are inside of us that are not true to who we are. It's about seeing more of the world, seeing more of our life. All of this journey, in essence, is it's a journey that I talk about as a journey from duality to unity, and we'll maybe touch on that in a slightly different way in the future. There are going to be different aspects to what I want to share, and the important things I'm sharing here are basically a vision, what I call a vision of empowerment, because these are ideas that can help change the way we view illness, change the way we view ourselves, this is like the restructuring of our mental program around healing, around illnesses, and so that we can drop some old patterns, some old stories, some old ideas, and some old programs, and plant some new seeds. These new seeds are, first of all, they're planted in the mind with ideas and sharing of information so that you can get your head around some stories. I'd like to dive into how we create illnesses and the symbolic mirroring between the mind, the emotions, and the body being in essence just one energy manifest in different levels of vibration. And I'm going to share some practices and some exercises that are a little bit more interesting, can be part of our healing experience. So the vision of empowerment. Oh yeah, right. This is a sexy title because the ego needs to be persuaded to change. We have an ego which is very rigid, doesn't like change. It likes to own its identity, and it likes to stay the same, and it likes to feel empowered with what it knows. And the mind and the ego, they come hand in hand in that. Mentally, we love to hold on to certain realities because it makes us feel strong and empowered, and it makes us feel like we understand our life. The only issue being is a lot of the mental programs that we picked up along the time of our lives, and a lot of the programs that are inside of society are not healthy programs, are very outdated and very old. And so we need to persuade our mind to let go of that stuff. And so in order to do this, we need to plant some other ideas. We need to convince ourselves mentally this is a great idea. We even need to trick our ego into being willing and open and inviting change into our life, when in reality this means that the ego is going to die a little bit. But that's all good, because the ego can get on board and the mind can get on board too. And this is kind of like the masculine mind wanting to know everything and wanting to say and needing to say yes to this whole process, which is an important process of internal transformation. This is important for different reasons, but we know that if our mind understands something, then we can feel safe about it. If we intellectually understand something, even if it hasn't been an experience yet, when we can intellectually understand something and grab something and make ourselves empowered by that whole story, then it helps. It just helps the body feel safe. And when the body feels safe, then it can relax. And when we relax, we can actually create some change in our lives. Okay.
Marcus?
Yes.
Ineke is still in the waiting room. She asked if you can let her in.
Yeah, I think I just did.
Okay, thank you.
I think I just did.
I'm here. Thank you.
Yes. It appears at the top of the screen, but I had to click a couple of buttons. Okay, so moving on. So I'm just giving a quick recap about last week's webinar that we did. So this is what I call a journey from duality to unity, because the unity, which represents our wholeness, it represents us really feeling connected with who we are, being in love with ourselves, being in love with life, embracing more of the universe, embracing more of ourselves. This is not where we are, maybe, or this is our unhealed self. Or unhealed self is this fragmented self, or this separate place that we're coming from towards this more united and more whole, loving connection with who we are and with life in general. So this is why I call it a journey from duality to unity. It's one of the ways of looking at illness as being how many programs that we have inside of ourselves that create more division and more separation inside of ourselves, inside of our psyche, between ourselves and the world, create more, more barriers and more limits. And while some of these barriers and limits are good between ourselves and the world, in the end, the bigger picture is to embrace all of who we are and actually at least come to a place of compassion and understanding towards all of life around us as well. So we're moving away from a good, bad, right and wrong mental dynamic and into the understanding of, hey, everything has two sides to it in this world, but our ability to look from a mental level at the connectedness between all things, the good inside the bad inside the good, breaks away this rejection and this pushing away dynamic, which we do a lot with everything that's uncomfortable, including illnesses. And this is where we take away, or we stop the rejection story, and we start empowering ourselves to embrace more of life that we would normally push away. So this is a journey. One way that I describe the journey of healing is to move away from this rejection dynamic towards ourselves and enter into a more embracing and what is ultimately an empowering experience in our life when we accept more of who we are. And that acceptance is the first key to self-love, because if we can learn to embrace and accept who we are and life on the outside, that opens up a door to feeling more connected to ourselves, more connected to life, and that opens up the door to love being this ultimate glue of the universe, if you want to call it that. So, and the last of all there's this idea of learning to embrace death, because death is a very the birth and death cycle. This is obvious duality that we experience within inside of the 3D reality of this time-space continuum that we're living in. And we embrace birth, but we don't really embrace death. And in order to feel more connected to a very natural cycles that are inside of us on a day-to-day basis, we need to embrace change, and embracing death is part of embracing change, because without it there is no change. And so letting go, surrendering, giving up is all part of being opened, and emptying that cup. And being empty is all about being in a space to create new life inside of ourselves, to rejuvenate ourselves and to become new people. And we will all agree that on some level or another, healing, whether we want to look at it on whatever level it is, it's all about creating change, and it's all about encouraging movement and moving away from stagnation and creating some form of transformation that needs to take place, that is asking to take place, and is part of our life journey. So we spoke a little bit about the causality of illnesses, and understanding illness and causality is kind of important. So we normally see the causality, or what are the causes of illness. We normally see them on a very 3D physical material level of cause and effect, where we see that illnesses come from something physical. And this is the study of Western science and Western medicine, is the practice of looking into the material reasons for things happening. And this is definitely a real thing, or it's definitely something that's valid on many levels. We give the example of our illnesses. Let's say if we had a common cold or a flu, of which the virus is going around these days, it's very much a part of it. We can see that the cause of our symptoms of our illnesses can be related to this one microscopic virus that we might be catching, and that might enter into our body in the form of a flu. But how it affects our body, and whether we are strongly affected by it or not strongly affected by it, will depend upon our inner immune system. It will depend upon how healthy we are in the given moment. And that health and that immune system setup is going to relate much more to certain patterns and habits that we have that connects illnesses or the causality to our emotional and mental selves. In other words, if we have a low immune system because we don't eat well enough, and we're not very good cooks, or we're not very good at looking after ourselves, which can come with going to bed early and getting ample sleep. It can come with exercising your body and really paying attention to the body's need to move itself and stay healthy and strong and flexible. If we don't do as much of that, or we don't eat the right food because we don't look after ourselves, or we try and escape in having alcohol binges and going out and getting wasted and staying up till 3 a.m. and then waking up the next day and doing the same again. If we have all of these tendencies, then these are more mental programs, emotional habits that we have that come from a parental inheritance, they come from society, and they come from what we have learned in life experience. And these can be seen as alternative causes for illness to take place. But then, and we didn't touch on this last time, but I'm going to dive in now, there is a spiritual causality towards illnesses, and this can be seen in two ways. One of the ways is that sometimes we're born with an illness, and this is like an inherited story that we come with, and we can't really understand the spiritual causality unless we open our minds to the idea that maybe there's more to us as beings than what is just born into a baby's body and dies as an old person, as an old man or woman, or maybe dies a little bit earlier. Unless we see that we are a conscious soul, maybe jumping into one body and then maybe another body, and opening our mind to the idea of reincarnation, which is a flexible idea on many fronts. But unless we are open to that, we won't really grasp this idea of spiritual causality as far as past life is concerned. However, there is also the spiritual causality of future life, and this is also something that's interesting, but something that needs to be looked at, because we can get sick, for example, and we can heal ourselves. We can have a healing experience, and that healing experience can be that we went to a doctor and got a pill. It can be that we learned to change our life habits and became fitness freaks. So we learned to grow and stop holding on to a certain area of our life which makes us feel unworthy and resentful or angry at the world, and we transform that for some reason. We came out of our illness through a personal transformational experience, whatever it might have been. We learned from that. That learning has made us feel empowered. We then take that learning and then we share that with somebody in the future, and we share our teachings and what we've learned in life with somebody in the future, and somebody else in the future is going to then take our experience, hear us as a witness. And it's so powerful when you hear somebody as a witness like that, that person is then going to be inspired to copy us and walk the path that we've walked and experience and have the same experience and heal themselves. And then that person is then going to have a ripple effect upon the world. Now, this futuristic ripple effect is also what's seen as a spiritual cause for an illness. So we could say we got ill because so-and-so coughed on me and shared his virus. That's one way of looking at it. We got ill because our immune system was low, because we like to drink too much and we have low self-esteem. We try to hide from our emotions, and that's why we like to drink so much, for example, or one of the reasons. But we can also say, hey, I got that illness because in the future, I'm going to heal myself, and I'm going to have such a rich experience of transformation, healing myself, that I'm going to share and be an inspiration for the world. And that is a future reason for us actually becoming ill in the first place. Now, this is something that we can't see or pre-see, because we don't all have the third eye, psychic awareness and vision open to see the future. But nevertheless, this is seen as a spiritual causal reason for you, for something manifesting in your life right here and now in the present. This is not that far-fetched, but it means that reasons for what is happening now in our lives can come from the future as well as the past. And it comes from, and both of which we might not be aware of and might be very difficult for us to be aware of. And it's called a spiritual causality because we have to have faith in it. It's not something that anybody's going to prove, but we can feel it and we can experience and have glimpses of past life, and we can also have glimpses about how we can learn and share beautifully in the future. So I'm sure you can get this one and understand it in more than one way. We don't need to understand all the causality of why illnesses take place inside of our body. We need to dive a little bit deeper than we normally do, because this deeper diving will actually help us comprehend a more and have a more holistic and metaphysical view of what our illnesses are. We're going to have a much more complete way of understanding why it is we're manifesting certain stories in our lives. And if we have a more, even on a more just a simple, more emotional and mental level, which is sufficient, if we grab those programs that are connected to our physical symptoms and understand those programs, and then we can take our experience of healing to another level. And that other level is going to be something that usually will not be inspired or encouraged necessarily by traditional Western type doctors, but much more a psychological story that's going to be new agey and woo, and more into the healing that we all love and talk about. Making that generalization for everyone here. So we are one being. We have many vibrations to ourselves, some of which are invisible and unseen, and we do not understand nearly as well. We don't really comprehend our physical existence and our physical body. We understand a little bit about it. We're learning every day, and we're trying to understand and grow in our understanding of how our physical body works. But the physical body is usually where we put all of our attention. It's where we feel our consciousness is awake. But the physical body is not the only energy that we are. We are very much a strong emotional energy and a mental energy, which is difficult to describe outside of our body, but exists as a vibrational energy that can be shared on a different level of consciousness. I believe that mentally right now, for example, we're all connected because we're all doing the same thing in the same space. And on this mental level, the things that I'll be saying maybe will also be influenced by the collective mental consciousness that we are experiencing all together. This is something that I believe. This is also, it's also part of what I forgot to introduce as a disclaimer at the beginning, that these are all ideas that I've grown to believe in and embody in my life, and feel are important to share. You can take whatever you want, throw away the rest, by all means. But I believe that, yeah, we're all connected on energetical levels, emotional levels, spiritual levels, but mental levels, we can actually experience this. We can experience connecting to somebody's vibe, and all that might sound also hippie and woo. We can feel the energy of a space. We can feel the energy of people. We are much more capable of having conscious energetical exchanges with the life in ways that more and more people are being open to experience these days, and yet are not easy to describe in physical terms. The closest we get to describe about this is speaking about electromagnetism, which the body emits out into the world. We don't see it, but we can pick up on it, and those electromagnetic vibes that are emanated from our hearts and from all of our bodies at all times create what's known as the aura. But that aura reaches out and touches and interacts and has influence upon, as well as is influenced by, everything that's in our environment and everything that we can touch on a mental time-space continuum, which is slightly different than the physical one. So the idea of having one being with many energies means that when the physical body manifests something, it's speaking to us in the physical way, but normally the physical body only has to manifest something when we, let's put myself back on here, the physical body only manifests things when we actually avoid seeing and experiencing some things on a more inner, deeper level. In other words, if there are certain programs that don't serve us, that are not good for our own growth and our own personal life journey, these programs are old, they're outdated. In some way, they are causing us to not move in the right direction, or maybe they are blocking our future experience of who we are. Maybe they are patterns which are causing us pain and emotional trauma, which is from the past, are coming up and being repeated over and over again in our lives. If we hold on to these programs and we hold on to these traumas and we don't look at them and we don't dive deep enough in order to understand where they're coming from and how we can move and transform and change them, then sooner or later the physical body starts shouting and says, hey, look, there's something here. There's something, there's something that's been shouting out on an unconscious level for you to change for a long time, and you haven't been listening. And a lot of the time we don't listen. We'll have maybe conflicting interactions with other people, but we'll think, there's nothing there, and we'll just pass it off, and we'll bypass all of these lessons. And so there's all of our experiences in life are going to be like learning and teaching experiences, where we are continuously in this playground and in this schoolroom of the universe, and we're most of the time unconsciously wandering around and in a bit of a daydream, trying to figure out what it is the lessons are we're going to learn. Every now and then we need a physical prompt. We need a little nudge on a physical level, on a bodily level, and we need our bodies to come out, shout at us, smack us in the face, kick us up the arse, and really nudge us a little bit more brutally but honestly in order that we actually can't ignore changes. So this is where the physical body tops all the other stuff, because if you've got a mental program that you don't want to look at, you can hide it quite well. We get really good at hiding those mental programs. If we have an emotional trauma from a past event, and we hold on to pain, resentment, fear, doubt, anger, all those stories of shame and guilt, and all those negative emotions that are related to past events, are related to ancestral stories, are related to stuff that we have come here to understand, transform, deal with, and grow and move through. If we get very good at hiding from that too, we get very comfortable with a certain amount of pain to the point where we don't think it's anything that we need to change. We get, we'll get very good at sweeping things under the rug and locking them away in a closet and forgetting, pretending that everything's okay when it's not. We love to put on our rose-tinted glasses and make things appear to be, or pretend that life is wonderful, when maybe our inner world, it's okay, but it's definitely not wonderful. And then the body comes around and says, hey, there's something for you to look at, and we can't ignore the body. This is why the body becomes the most wonderful teacher, and because it is a fantastic teacher in this way, we can learn from communicating more intimately with our body, and there's nothing that happens stronger and more drastically and promotes change faster than uncomfortable experiences. So uncomfortable experiences become the best teachers for us, and sometimes those uncomfortable experiences are not necessarily physical. They'll first come into our lives in a more emotional, interactive way between ourselves, or between ourselves and life on the outside, usually somebody else. There'll be these programs will come up, and these emotional experiences will come up, and in that, we'll get a chance to work on ourselves. We'll get an opportunities to really go a little bit deeper and create changes that need to take place. But if we don't manage to, then sometimes the physical body has to come up with stuff, and it has to tell us, hey, you've got this old program, you've got this really unconscious story that's difficult for you to see, and I'm going to help you see it by manifesting a little symptom here or a little symptom there, or even if maybe it's a big one, just to show you, hey, there's something inside that would benefit from you taking a deeper look. And this is where illnesses become the best teachers for us, and this is where we can find that these symptoms that we have that are going to help us avoiding, I put down here, yeah, no, that wasn't a mistake, that we normally avoid making changes, and so we can avoid this avoiding, and we can allow a little bit of the discomfort into our lives, and we can practice surrendering. We can even fight to surrender. It seems like a paradox, but a lot of the healing experiences in life are going to be a bit paradoxical in nature. We can embrace our own vulnerability. That's one thing that illness will come and give us plenty of in bucket loads, is vulnerability. And the vulnerability that we experience in illness is something that's super important. It's empowering in itself. Why? Because we don't like to be weak. We think it's wrong to be weak. And there are certain illnesses that we have that are going to debilitate us completely and make us feel helpless. And in that helpless state, we naturally surrender to a death. And when we stop holding on and we are open to, okay, I open, we really surrender to a change, then that's what will allow us to break down old patterns and be open, be less rigid and less stubborn to holding on to certain stories that may well have helped in the past, but are not helping us right now. And we need to keep the red light working. In that case, we don't want to take the red light out, and that's the metaphor of the red light on the dashboard not being the problem, but being just the symptom of the illness instead of the actual issue that might be taking place in the motor of our bodies. So this is something that's kind of important, I feel. There are certain ideas, myths, perspectives that I'd like us to change. I could add to this list all day, but here are some of the important ones. That healing is just about ridding the body of illness. It's not, okay? And that sometimes can be a great thing. It seems to be the goal for a lot of healing practice. Let's see if we can get rid of this illness. And that type of goal orientated, which is very masculine in nature. Let's see if we can, cut this out of our lives. And sometimes there's an aspect of that which is good, in the fact that there are habits which we do need to cut out of our lives, but the illness itself is not the habit. The illness itself is just showing us that there is a habit behind the illness. The illness is just the red light on the dashboard, and we need to see what's really the bigger issue that's underneath and that's behind this symptomatic stories that are appearing and coming up in our lives. So another idea is that healing is a practice that we only do when we're sick. Actually, no. Being sick is really not the best time to practice a lot of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, because when you're feeling shitty, you don't have the energy to do half of the things that we're going to be speaking about. We're going to be talking about something that requires a little bit of will and concentration and focus and desire. When you're sick, you just want to do nothing. And so the best practice of healing is actually done when you're well, when you are healthy in your lives. This is super important, and this is something that we don't give so much importance to. We think about the healing process as something that we only need to worry about when the illness comes up, when it gets really bad, and then I'll do something about it. No, start now. Start as soon as you can, because then you can, the actual best healing practice is a preventative one. It's one that prevents all illnesses from actually needing to come to the physical manifestation stage of shouting. Being sick is bad and wrong. That goes hand in hand with this idea that death is bad and wrong, because illnesses can lead to death, and being sick is bad because I can't get on with my job, I can't do this, and I can't do that, and I really want to do this. And illnesses are not wrong. Illnesses are incredibly valuable experiences. They might feel uncomfortable, but then feeling uncomfortable is a valuable experience. Unless we can make a switch inside of our heads and change that belief, that idea that being sick is bad or wrong, then we're going to have a bit of an issue with illnesses and working with them. If we can get sick and allow ourselves to be sick and surrender into the illness, as well as fight for a little bit of awareness and understanding that can be something that we can work towards. But the majority of the time, as I said, in illness, we don't usually want to work at all. We just want to let go and surrender and allow whatever death needs to take place. Illness makes me feel weak and that I should be strong. This is a common idea, because we have this idea that we ought to be healthy all the time, and if we're sick, then I'm weak, and I don't want to show my weaknesses to the world. And hey, I'm a spiritual teacher. I've struggled with this one for a long time. I'm a spiritual teacher, and I shouldn't be sick. I'm teaching about illness. I shouldn't be sick. No, what I've seen time and time again is that when people actually start looking at this stuff a little bit deeper, they'll actually manifest some illnesses and some sicknesses, because your mind that starts to open to learn these lessons, that's when your soul goes, oh great, now it's more open, then we can give it a little bit of a lesson, and they'll actually learn something and move and change something deeper inside of you. A lot of the time, if we get sick and we just ignore it and we just take a few pills and just carry on, and we don't actually learn the lesson. And so sometimes when you are actually open to learn some of the lessons, you might find sickness coming in, not because it's wrong, but because you are more open and ready to make some changes. This seems like a bit of a paradox, but it's kind of like the way it works. And so let's try to avoid judging illness and judging any sickness that we have, because there's something super important in the changes that can come from it. And those changes usually only happen at the right time. And that timing can be perfect, and it can mean that, hey, maybe we're ready to take on a new stage of our growth, and we're maybe to jump into a new experience and have maybe a humbling experience, but a humbling experience that's quite necessary in our lives. We have this idea that we don't have time to be sick because we're running on this timetable where we have to do this and this and this and this and this. And this is, it's a tough one to break, because that's the way that society is set up. It's very difficult for us to give ourselves time to be ill and to heal ourselves, and to think that it's something that's more important than going out and making money, for example, when in actual fact, it's much more valuable than going out and making money. So taking time out for healing practices, whatever they might look like, is super important. I can't heal myself is another idea, that we don't feel like we're good enough, strong enough, conscious enough, have enough willpower, have enough determination, have enough consistency, have enough ability to understand. We will put ourselves down in so many ways, but it's all rubbish. You don't need to understand things to the degree which somebody else does. You don't need to know as much as somebody else does. You don't need to be as good as whatever you think you need to be as good as. You just need to be yourself, whatever that might be. And believe me, yourself is always going to be good enough for you to create any changes in your life. And the last one is, healing may be mental, but I don't need therapy. We all need therapy. I threw that one in there because I think at one time I thought I didn't need therapy in some sort of arrogant masculine way. Oh, no, I don't need therapy. Yeah, I do. We all could benefit from other people's perception of ourselves coming in and sharing their view, sharing skills with us, and teaching us how we can become more self-aware. And therapy is basically that, there are some things inside of ourselves that are very difficult for us to see, but it's very easy for somebody else to see, because it's not exactly their problem, or they may have gone through that problem. They may be dealing with something else, but they're not dealing with the actual story, but they know your story, and those people can be the ones that can help and inspire and help us a lot. So if you want to unmute yourselves and ask any questions or throw any ideas or comments out there, now's a good time.
Hi, Marcus. I've just put a comment in the chat box. Can you see it?
Yes, let's have a look. I'm gonna have to put my glasses on. Okay, I've been trying to clear chronic back pain for years without success, and I've done EHT and several processes and released lots of stuff. And
I've had all sorts of different healings, and
right.
I've practiced healing on myself as well.
Right.
And I can't seem to shift it.
Okay, so Mara, I'd like to get back to you.
Okay.
But it's a nice stepping stone that will take us into the next stage, or the next little part of the talk.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll use your example to maybe speak a little bit about the next phase, but I'd like to introduce a few more ideas before we get into that. I just want to know if anybody else got any other ideas about what I've been talking about. They can be specific to, or anything that you'd like to share.
Yes, I have a question. You were talking about uncomfortable experiences.
Yes.
What do you mean? Do you have examples of them? Because
oh yeah, I've got plenty of examples of uncomfortable experiences. Oh gosh.
What do you mean by it?
So Okay, so an uncomfortable experience. Okay, there's the uncomfortable experience of holding a yoga pose, yeah, and feeling that muscle go, ugh, no, or trying to stretch a little bit deeper than normal, yeah, and you're going, oh, that's so painful. I don't want to hold this pose. I don't want to hold this stretch. I want to come out. This is painful. I don't like it, you know. And there's that type of uncomfortable, which is a very physical experience, let's say, and yet we know that if we breathe, if we relax, and actually if we take our mind away from the uncomfortable sensation of that hamstring stretching as we're trying to do a forward bend, for example, yeah, if we take our mind away from that part of our body and just focus on our breath, we'll find we actually relax. We'll find the tension of that discomfort will actually disappear. And we'll find we'll teach ourselves to sit in that discomfort. And a lot of yoga is about this practice of allowing yourself a little bit of discomfort and allowing yourself to breathe into it and relax a little bit deeper into it. If we manage to go a little bit deeper into this experience, we'll find ourselves coming out the other side, going a little bit deeper into a stretch, and we'll come out of that stretch and we'll feel, oh my gosh, I feel amazing. That was fantastic. You know, I've really released a lot of tension that was building up there. For example, that can be one example of the beneficial experience of sitting in discomfort, right? And then there's the discomfort, let's say, of an emotional discomfort. Somebody says something that hurts you, that triggers an old trauma. Maybe it's somebody refers to you not being very clever, yeah, which triggers that trauma of your dad who told you that you were an idiot when you were a kid, or never feeling smart enough, or something like this, or pretty enough, or thin enough, or whatever enough, yeah, whatever trauma we might hold as far as lack is concerned, somebody in the world might come and trigger that trauma inside of us, and we'll feel, oh, you know, that doesn't feel very comfortable. What you just said, that feels like a very hurtful statement to me. You know, they might not have done it on purpose, and they might not have done it knowingly. It might just be your trigger that comes away. And sometimes we'll go, oh, I need to avoid that person because they're not safe people to come be around, because they're just going to trigger this pain inside of me. And instead of sitting with that pain and coming to terms and allowing yourself to experience and relive that trauma in order to understand where that pain actually comes from, we'll push it away. We'll push it away in different ways. We'll maybe laugh it off. We'll do a nervous giggle, and we'll pretend that we weren't triggered. Or we'll just avoid that person and we'll push them away, and we'll take them out of our life, and we'll we'll make sure that we don't ever have an interaction with anybody like that again. We'll just avoid the discomfort that life is bringing to us on an emotional level, when even this discomfort on an emotional level can actually be a beautiful teacher for us, and there is something for us to learn inside of it. Now, doesn't mean we need to stay with that person so they carry on triggering us. We can walk away, but don't walk away from the feeling. Take the feeling with you and take that experience with you, and allow yourself to sit in that discomfort so that you can identify what it is that's actually taking place. And you'll find that there's a program inside of you that says, hey, I believe that I'm not good enough like that, and that's a load of rubbish. And it's that program that is the real tyrant, not that person. That person just came to show you that program, or that thought pattern, that belief inside of you that needs to be changed. And so our ability to sit with a discomfort on the physical level is very akin to, or very able to mirror our ability to sit with any discomfort on an emotional level. And this quite often comes up with in the form of some type of conflict or something that doesn't feel quite right between ourselves and some other people that we're in relationship with, whatever that relationship might be, between kids, family, parents, whatever, you know, and they'll be triggering us, and they'll usually be triggering us for a specific reason. And whatever is uncomfortable has something that's the red flag, that's the red light dashboard that's saying, hey, there's something for us to look at here. And it's inside of us. We don't have to blame the outer world for the discomfort. We just need to recognize how uncomfortable we are being inside of ourselves. So this is what I mean. Does that explain your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Anybody else got
Yes, about these triggers, because I'm in these weeks, I'm every time I'm triggered about an old trauma.
yeah.
So I'm getting a kind of panic, and what I'm trying to do now to dive in it, to examine where it comes from, but it's very hard. So I'm trying to find a way. Okay, how can I next time, how can I accept this or embrace this without being completely out of control?
On an individual basis, there are going to be slightly different practices for different people. And I don't think that there's one cure-all for everybody. I do believe that there is a kind of a process which usually works for most people. One part of that process is becoming aware of the trigger, first of all. Gaining, and that awareness includes you understanding it. So not just, hey, I'm triggered. That's one level of awareness. The other level is going, hey, how am I being triggered? I'm being triggered yes, I'm feeling angry. Okay, why am I feeling angry? What am I feeling angry with? What don't I trust? What don't I like? What don't I want? What do I feel like I need to be, I need to put up my boundaries and say no to? All of these questions come out, and then we can ask ourselves certain questions in order that we can say, oh yes, what I actually don't like is that type of energy. Why not? And then we ask ourselves, why not? Why don't I like that type of energy? How am I being that person that is out there triggering me? How am I being that to myself? Becomes an important question, because a lot of the time we think that it's only the external world that triggers us, but really what's taking place is that it's a little bit like this we might have an inner voice which tells us, hey, you're not good enough, it's like a little devil on our shoulder. And we don't even recognize that there is this little voice most of the time, because it's in a very unconscious program, and it comes from a very long time ago, before we were super aware of how we were thinking. And it's just part of our own negative inner dialogue, and yet it's there. It's like a program. It's like there's a lot of other stories that are built upon this brick, and it's very difficult to take that program out, because there are a lot of other ideas that are built on top of it, like a wall. There's a wall built on top of this one brick that was back down there in the past. There's lots of experiences that back it up, that justify that brick being there, and we'd have to break down the whole wall in order to get that brick out. But sometimes the awareness that we need is understanding, okay, that's just an idea. It's just an old idea, an old belief, and you need to own it. So there comes this experience of understanding, not just on one level, but on several levels. In other words, to find a little bit of mental cognizance or knowledge about what it is that's being triggered, and then owning it. Okay, so the owning of it is super important. And so instead of pretending that the trigger is on the outside, finding that inner voice that mirrors that trigger on the outside. So for example, I had there's many examples of this one. I had two friends. Let me give you this example. I had two friends. They were polar opposites. one was a guy who was the most masculine of guys, you know, he'd like goal orientated, I'm going to go and do this and this and this and this, and he'd get up at 5 a.m. and he'd be, you know, like a military sergeant, you know, and he'd organize his life, and he'd be so effective, and he'd be so efficient, and he'd have this goal and that goal. And I had this other friend who was the epitome of the feminine, relaxed, laissez-faire, whatever, just, and she was like, oh, I get up at 9 a.m, oh, I might do that, but I might not, you know. She was complete other extreme. She was to the point of just going with the flow. And these two friends were kind of so polar opposite that they triggered each other because they were in the same space, and they would trigger each other terribly, and they didn't like each other because this guy, all he could see is this lazy girl who doesn't get anything done, and all she could see is this arrogant guy who's just like so, you know, mental and not compassionate and blah blah blah, all these things. But really what they were seeing is different aspects of themselves that they weren't okay with, because this guy didn't know how to relax, and he had an issue with letting go, surrendering, relaxing, just allowing. And she was a wonderful example of this, and mirrored what he wasn't comfortable with, and he mirrored back to her what she wasn't very good at, which is, you know, getting up off her ass and actually moving herself and getting fired up and motivated, which we all need a little bit of both. You know, we can have a majority of one, and that's fine, but we all need all of the elements in our life, and they will create balance inside of ourselves. And so the reason I'm talking about this is because we'll naturally just see something on the outside, it'll be an exaggerated form of something that we might not relate to on the inside, but if we can relate to it, that relationship will give us the understanding that we need in order to be aware of what these programs are that are asking to be changed. That becomes the owning. That becomes this taking something that can be an outer experience and making it and empowering ourselves to be able to change it from the inside out. Then after that, there comes the will and the intention to shift stories, to change habits, and that requires a little bit of perseverance and endurance. Let me share a little bit more. So there are key practices. Awareness, observation. This comes in observation, meditation, journaling, questioning. Awareness is, the questioning part is super important. So if we can question ourselves, question our lives, question where these habits might come from, then the mind gets on board. When the mind gets on the board, then it automatically creates this vibration of relaxation for the body, and the body can actually relax and say, okay, I understand. Because the mind, when it understands, then the body gets to experience a lesser version of tension. We're going to need courage, because the moment you look a little bit deeper inside at some of these patterns, the first thing that you encounter are in your subconscious are fears that you might have repressed, stories that you don't normally look at. And so there's going to be part of our journey which needs to be a little bit uncomfortable. It doesn't have to be outrageously uncomfortable. It can be like stretching in a yoga pose type of uncomfort, where we actually choose to go into something. We sit with the discomfort that it's bringing up. We become aware, even more aware. We're shining even more light. We're allowing the light that we're shining on a mental level then to become physical and emotional, and actually embody in ourselves on an experiential level. So we're encouraging ourselves to recreate certain patterns and certain programs, to feel the discomfort of them, and then to say yes to them, and to say, hey, I can allow this to come in. When you say yes to something, then it's not something you have to be afraid of, because you've just taught yourself it's not scary anymore. This is a super important practice, but it takes a little bit of courage. So this courage becomes a practice, right? And then we need a little bit of discipline and persistence, because we're going to want to fall back into the same, to believing the same things, to holding on to the same habits, because habits are habits. You know, the body gets uncomfortable, even though a habit is wrong for your body. Like you eat crap food all the time, your body gets so into eating crap food that it feels comfortable with eating crap food, even though it's unhealthy for the body will not be shouting, oh, let's go and eat something, you know, wonderful. It will be, no, give me more crap food. Yeah, I want it. Why? Because that's what it's learned. And what the body knows is comfortable. What the body knows becomes a known experience which feels safe for it. This is why we have this idea of, you know, comfort food. And comfort food is not necessarily the best, the healthiest food, but it's a food that we know, we understand, it makes us feel relaxed, yeah? And we'll have certain habits which are comforting but not good for us, yeah? And so we're going to need a little bit of discipline to push ourselves out of that false comfort zone and recreate different habits and different patterns. That requires a little bit of will. It requires, we're going to need some help, you know? It's like going cold turkey on certain habitual ways of thinking and acting in life, and that means that we're going to need to, you know, discipline ourselves and set boundaries with ourselves and say, hey, no, you don't do that. You don't get on your phone before you do your breathing exercise in the morning. You do the breathing exercise first and just ignore the phone. Something like that. I'm just bringing up my own personal boundaries that I need to set. Then there's the practice of expression. Okay, so if we actually manage to embrace patterns, habits, illness, discomfort, and all of these, what we might previously have thought negative experiences, and we've changed our judgment upon them and told ourselves and experienced ourselves saying yes to them and allowing them into our lives in different ways. This breaks down a certain taboo that they might have. And the taboo previously could have come from any of those ideas that we were talking about earlier on, where it's wrong to be sick, it's bad to be weak, and all of those ideas. Those ideas will create feeling shame or guilt or fear around the whole some aspect of our healing process. So we might have a program that makes us feel not worthy, and I can relate to this too. And yet I've got this other program that is built on top of that one, which says, oh, you're supposed to be really strong. Why? Because you don't feel good enough and you don't feel worthy enough. So you're supposed to feel really strong, and you're supposed to show the world how strong you are. So I run around showing the world how strong I am, in an attempt to avoid feeling weak and feeling more honest, I'm not good enough. And then the I'm not good enough will come along and slap me in the face in some way or another, and it has done many times. And then I'm forced to sit with that feeling, oh, okay, you know, if I don't feel ashamed for not feeling good enough, if I don't feel ashamed for feeling weak, if I'm able to be vulnerable, if there is no shame and guilt or fear about the world seeing me that way, then I can share it with the world. And the sharing or the expression becomes a super important practice, because the moment you actually share your vulnerability, or you share your weakness, or you voice your what you might have been afraid to voice before and share with other people, if you choose the right people, this will create a much stronger bond, attachment, connection, and a beautiful loving experience, which will then inspire you. You will release fear that's around the fear and shame that is around that whole idea that you shouldn't be that way, and you will transform the program that says you shouldn't share and you shouldn't be a certain way. So the expression story is kind of huge. We're going to get onto the symbolism of illnesses a little bit. I'd just like to offer any more questions if anybody has some before we move on. No, anybody with what we just shared? Anybody got any more comments? If not, we'll move straight on. Okay, so let's look at the symbolism of illnesses. Okay, so and this is where we come to maybe answer some of your question, Myra. So in order to make relationships between the mind and our physical symptoms that are coming up, there are certain things we can do. There are a couple of good books about it. I'm not as well read on the story because I was living in Guatemala up to last year. It wasn't very available for me to go shopping online and Amazon, so I didn't do any of that. And I haven't read so many books about this topic, and I'm sure there are some great books, but I can't recommend it. There's only one that I can probably recommend by an author called Rudy Godalka, which I can put in the chat a little bit later. But I read some of his books, and he was a good guy. I actually did a course with this guy, and he's a good doctor, but some of his books are a little bit confusing for specific reasons. But anyway, I've been working with it a little bit, and I actually taught a course on healing for a long time to specifically just individuals working with different stories. And there are certain practices that you can do in order to help understand your story with your illnesses that can make it a very personal understanding, which is the most important thing that happens. So try some of these questions. Here we go. What does the affected part of my body do for me? So here we're looking on a physical level, yeah. And we're looking at the body, and we're saying, let's say, for your back stories. So back is a common story. So the back, anything to do with the skeleton, has to do with life structure. So life structure is a little bit more difficult to change. It's not something that gets changed very quickly. It's a structural stuff. It's something that's a little bit more deeper inside of ourselves, because it's actually the form of how you are physically. Sometimes it's about adapting to the structure that we have instead of actually changing the structure that we have. And that adaptation and allowing ourselves to be a certain way can be the shift that actually causes the structure to change. Or you might find that you might have to go a little bit deeper and really uproot certain old patterns that might well seem fundamental to your identity. That's a slightly bigger story. The back in general is very much to do with the structure of support, because the spinal column supports our whole upright nature. It supports us and our ability to stand tall and upright. In this moment, we see that anything that supports us to be ourselves and to be tall and to be seen is something that will be related to our back. So we look at the back and we go, okay, the body's function, the back's function has to do with structure and support. And so whether it's lower back support, this is going to be, and you can look at this, the area of your back which hurts you as well, because it's going to be related to the chakra system quite a lot. And you can see anything that's really lower back is going to be more financial in nature, or it's going to be the actual physical support that we might feel is lacking in our life. A lot of the time we feel like life should be supporting us because we might not have had enough support as a child, or we might not have felt supported to be ourselves by our parents as children. And so that lack of support comes in at a very early age and then carries on, and then our life is built upon that idea that we don't deserve support on one front, that we might not have, we are accustomed to having to do it all ourselves, or having to look after ourselves and not be supported by somebody else. Or we might have the opposite and say, oh, we were already always supported all the time by somebody else, and so we get in the habit of somebody else supporting us and we can't support ourselves. Both of those seem to be polar opposites, but they all have to do with the same area of unconscious programming, and they will affect that part of our body in the same way. Yeah, so you can see the programming and the ideas are going to relate to the part of your body and what it does. You know, if it's your legs that help you walk and move and change position and be, you know, and be active and mobile, all of those ideas of walking and changing position and being active and being mobile and changing where you are and moving from one place to another, energetically, but physically, but also emotionally and mentally, moving from one place to another, it's all going to be related. This is, you know, very, well, we take it back to the basic level. If you've got headaches and the mind and your head, it's going to be very much related to control stories, you know, because your mind is the part of you that's trying to figure things out and intellectually control and direct and create order. It's all about your relationship to order, to control, and your relationship to thinking, your relationship to how intellectual you are and how strong your mind works and your willpower. And all of these relationships are going to be something that might come up with head stories, headaches, and things like this. This is just to throw a few examples out there. How does illness, weakness affect me on a physical level? Yeah, so when we look at this, we can see two main stories coming up. They might appear to be opposite, but they will both be valid in our understanding of what healing can be. And what I mean by the opposite is, let me give you an example. So here I put what we look at. Here we can look at what we can't do and yet what we are forced to do. So an illness, for example, may well lay you on your back. It may force you to sit and do nothing, right? And lie down in bed and have somebody come and look after you. This could be a nightmare for some people. And I know some people who just love to do all the time, and they don't give themselves time to relax, and they overwork themselves, they overstress themselves, they'll experience a creative burnout, and their body will just suffer from exhaustion. And suddenly you're forced, you get a sickness which will put you in bed, and you are forced to do something that you don't give your body enough of, or you don't give yourself enough of, right? So here comes the program that I must work like an idiot until I can't work no more. And we have that idea inside of our head, and that comes from usually a program of unworthiness that's behind it, and we can dive into that too. But an illness will sometimes force you to do what you don't do enough of in your life, or it will show you what you are doing mentally and emotionally to yourself through the symptoms that are coming out. Now, what I mean by that is that sometimes we are actually hurting ourselves with certain beliefs that we have about ourselves. Yeah, so we can tell ourselves, I'm not good enough, and that might be such a strong and yet unconscious program that our body will then manifest a not being good enough, right? It will manifest that not being good enough to show us, and it will feel painful. That's going to be the difference. It will be something that will be uncomfortable physically, because we might have that pattern mentally, but we don't relate it to emotional pain. And so we don't see the pattern. We don't have to, because if we don't relate that idea of I'm not good enough to an emotional pain, then why would I bother changing it? Yes, okay, I've got a little bit of, insecurity. I've got a little bit of self-worth issues, but the whole world has self-worth issues. So what, and we might just ignore it or try to bypass it on some level. And yet, when it becomes physical, we can't bypass it. And so your symptoms will either show you exactly what you're doing to yourself mentally and emotionally, or they will force you, an illness will force you to do what you're not doing enough of, both, and sometimes at the same time. You might be afraid to be vulnerable, and so an illness will whack you out on the floor. You might not be able to accept help from other people. You might be afraid to ask for help, and so an illness will get you so weak that you have a good excuse to have that experience of asking for help. Right? You might be afraid to experience vulnerability. So the illness is going to knock you on your off your feet so that you can experience vulnerability. So these are things that illnesses will do and sicknesses will do to help us experience some things that we're avoiding experiencing, and at the same time showing us what we are doing to ourselves in more physical dynamics. You can get in contact with these stories by asking yourself, how am I challenged on an emotional and mental level? So there's going to be all sorts of fears, all sorts of doubts that might come up when we're in a physical sickness. But this question is really important to ask yourself when you're not in a physical question. So if you dive into your illnesses and you can say, hey, how does my illness challenge me emotionally and mentally? You're much more likely to be able to observe it and feel and look at those belief systems when you're not actually in the illness than when you actually are. So it's something that you can do and practice this type of healing exercise outside of illness experiences. Because when you call upon them, you can become more aware of them. When you're actually sick, it's, as I said, it's not always the best time to be fully aware and fully conscious. You might just want to chill out and do nothing. Are there any questions as far as this bit is concerned? No, is there anybody still there watching this, or you're falling asleep?
No, we're here.
Okay, great.
I've just had a huge aha and realized exactly why my back has been so much and my legs so much worse in the last few years. It's just, and I'm just writing it all down, Marcus, as you're talking.
No,
But I recognize what you're saying about not the lower back and not being supported when I was younger, and then having support and that being withdrawn and feeling anger at that. And it's just all there. I just realized it as you've been talking. I've just been writing it down.
Well,
So
thank you for
thank you.
offering that example, because I'm sure more than one person can relate to that story.
Yeah, no, it's just all there. I don't know how to release it now. That's the only thing. So
yeah, that's I got a little bit about that, but that becomes a journey. That becomes a proper conscious journey, and it's a personal one. What we've been talking about up to now is a lot of awareness practices, and these awareness practices are allow us to then, okay, wow, I've had awareness of this, of that, but the awareness isn't going to be enough. We have to make it experiential. So some of the practices that I've been sort of pointing towards are experiential practices, but they require maybe a little guided meditation, or they require you to dive in, to sit, and to practice being with your own discomfort, being with the emotions that need to come up, and allowing that more experiential aspect of the healing practice to come into your life, so that you can start to, it's not just on a mental level, but you can start to experience what it feels like to say yes to something that you will normally say no to. And that simple experience as it is will unleash a whole bunch more aha moments, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. It's quite profound, actually. It's been quite profound, really.
So one more little thing I'd like to share with you guys. One last, I think do I have one last page? Yes, I do. Finding lessons. So more questions to ask you, to ask yourself here. I mean, I'm just throwing questions out there. The questions seem like it's an intellectual story, but these questions are much more about how you can create some change in your life. So first of all, it's about awareness. What can I see that's asking to be shifted and changed? Name it, make it very simple. Make the answers to this be clear. Oh my gosh, what is asking for me to be changed is this idea, this very simple idea that I'm not good enough in this way. Yeah, make it specific. Don't make it general, that I am not worthy of, boom, receiving in this way, allowing in this way, I'm not good enough, whatever in that, whatever the program might be. I'm just giving you an example, but find out what is asking to be shifted and changed. My relationship with myself, the food that I eat, it can be something physical, it can be not just mental and emotional, but you ask yourself, what are the obvious changes? And some of the previous work will make this question be very easy to answer with a very simple, clear message, clear answer. How do I make this change and create more balance? So this is a question you do need to ask yourself. You can find help. People can help you with this. Once you've been able to name your thing, you can go and Google it if you want. What do I do with this? And you're going to have all sorts of interesting stuff come up, but what is important is what you are ready to do, and what you can make happen, and the answers that can come from you. Because in the end, the answers that you can channel, that you can bring from the inside out, are going to be more powerful answers. They're going to be more empowering for you. It's going to be a completely different experience if you find some of the key stories to what will help you create change than if somebody else tells you what they are. Great. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to get some guidance. But first of all, ask yourself, and ask yourself not just once, ask yourself twice, and ask yourself 3 times. Be stubborn at this, until you can find some answers. This is where a bit of persistence really needs to kick in, because if you don't get an answer straight away, ask again and again until you actually do get an answer. And this can be super valuable. When I think about change, what doubts and fears come up? So this is about identifying the resistance, okay? So there is naturally going to be, like we spoke about in the habits in the past, there are certain habits where we are just naturally afraid to change from those habits because we don't know who we would be outside of them. And it's a little bit scary to jump into the unknown. This is the story of, I can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I don't disagree with that story, but it is a bit tricky. It's tricky to change very old habits, and we don't need to change core stories overnight, but we do need to be open that they can change. And when you think about it, there is going to be some doubts, and those doubts and the fears that will come up will be the new red flags that teach you, hey, this is my resistance coming up. It's my resistance coming up to the change that I really would like to make. And every time those red flags come up, you can be compassionate to yourself. You can understand, this is just an old fear. This is just an old doubt. Okay, here it comes out again, and we can talk with ourselves about it, and we can allow it to come. We don't need to feed it. We don't need to hide it. We can even share it. We can express it, like I spoke about before. And there has to be no shame that we place around any of our fears. Otherwise, we're going to just hide them even more, allow them to come up. And the more we can actually say yes to our fears, the less afraid of our fear we actually become. And this is part of the actual practice. practice. This is actual conscious exercise. Allow ourselves to just feel the emotion. When we say yes to an emotion, it is not a scary thing, because we are actively choosing to feel it and to allow it. And that active choice stops and kills all the shame and all the automatic resistance that we might have to hide it and push it away and suppress it in any way. How do I activate less resistance and more faith? This becomes a practice, that we need to ask ourselves, well, what is a practice that can help me cultivate less fear, less resistance? How can I become more faithful inside of myself? This faith will actually come naturally if you take some of these steps seriously. If you find just one or two things that you can do for yourself that are acts of love for yourself, then your little girl inside is going to turn around and go, oh, he actually loves, he loves me. Yeah. And it's, in a way, it's like a he loves me, because it's that father that's actually doing something, the internal father inside of you that's doing something for that little girl, that's saying, yes, don't worry, I'm going to make sure that you get your exercise. I'm going to make sure that you don't get affected by that negative little demon voice inside. Now you shut up, demon voice. We love you, but shut up. And this is where we can cultivate less resistance or less fear, and that little girl will allow the change to happen, and she can drop some of those old patterns and those old habits, and she can sit in her more natural childlike surrender and faith in life, that life will be wonderful. Why? Because we're looking after her better. So if the more actions of self-love we give, the more we work a little bit at making these habits change, the experience behind that becomes a valuable one to make change happen. And we've come to nearly 9 o'clock, so there we go. Does anybody have any last questions before we end the talk today? I was going to do a little practice, but we don't really have time for it now. I'd like to leave it.
No questions, but I would like to thank you very much, Marcus. This has been really valuable for me.
Great, I'm so happy about that. I have actually, I created a course about maybe 9 years ago now, that I'm going to bring into the present moment, and maybe throw it as an offering in our group out there. And it's about a self-healing course, and it's not just about healing our physical illnesses or body, but it's just about healing ourselves on much more deeper levels, and it involves a lot more exercises and practice. But if you're into doing a little bit more of this work on a more conscious way, with a more guided format behind it, I'm going to throw an offering out there this week in the group. So thank you for joining me, everybody, and I hope this has served in some way. A little bit chaotic at the beginning, but I hope the message has come across in a useful way.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Great.
Looking forward to the self-healing part you're talking about.
Great. Thank you very much. And
I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah. So have a wonderful evening, and I wish you all the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.